I learned what shame tasted like the day I stepped off that stagecoach with nothing but the clothes I wore and ash memories burning the back of my throat. Christmas Eve, 1883. The frontier town of Cedar Ridge spread before me like a promise I couldn't keep. Other passengers claimed their trunks, their carpet bags, their carefully packed futures. I stood there with empty hands and a borrowed shawl, counting the ways I'd failed before I'd even begun. The stagecoach driver looked at me, looked past me, looked back. That all. Miss, I lied. Trunks coming later. He knew. I could see it in his eyes, the pity, the calculation, the slight shift in how he saw me. No trunk meant no money. No money meant desperation. Desperation meant I'd accept things proper. Women refused. I'd heard that math before. Hated it then. Hated it more now that I embodied it. 3 weeks earlier. Fire had consumed my Kansas home. Not just the house, everything inside it. The trousseau I'd spent 2 years assembling. The dishes wrapped in newspaper. The quilts my mother helped me stitch. The photograph of my parents. The seed packets for the garden I'd planned. The curtains I'd hemmed by lamplight. Everything a woman needed to build a proper life. Gone. I'd written to Peter, the rancher who'd answered my letter 6 months prior, explaining the delay. Didn't mention the fire had taken more than things. It took the version of myself I'd promised him, the capable woman who arrived prepared, dignified, ready to be a partner rather than a burden. The woman stepping off this stagecoach was what remained. I watched a family unload. The mother carried a hat box. The father wrestled a trunk. 2 children clutched dolls and wooden toys. Normal people with normal belongings. Building normal lives. I'd been normal once. Couldn't remember when I'd lost it. The cold bit through my shawl. December in Colorado meant snow, meant wind that found every gap in worn fabric. I had no winter coat. That had burned too. Everything had burned. Sometimes I still smelled smoke in my hair, though I'd washed it 3 times. A tall man approached through the crowd. Had to be Peter. I recognized his walk from my imagination measured, purposeful. The gait of someone who didn't waste movement. My stomach dropped. This was it. The moment he'd see what he'd gotten instead of what I'd promised. I'd learned young that showing weakness invited pity, and pity was just contempt, wearing a kinder face. So I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and prepared to meet the stranger I'd promised to marry back when I still had a future. He was closer now, close enough to see his weathered face, his kind eyes, the hat he removed as he approached. Those eyes worried me most. Kind eyes saw too much. Kind eyes expected things I couldn't give. Miss Gladys. I nodded. Words stuck somewhere between my pride and my throat. Peter Harlan. Welcome to Cedar Ridge. He offered his hand. I took it. His palm was rough, warm despite the cold. Working hands? Honest hands. The kind that built things instead of destroying them. The kind I'd need if I planned to survive here. Your journey was all right, he asked. All right. Such a simple question. Such a complicated answer. I chose the simpler lie. Long. He glanced past me, looking for luggage that didn't exist. I braced myself. This was where he'd ask, where I'd have to explain, where everything would change in his face, the calculation, the regret, the realization that he'd made a terrible mistake. Instead, he said, rough journey. Then, not a question, a statement, an offering of dignity I didn't deserve. It made everything worse somehow. I wanted him angry. Angry I could fight. Angry I understood. This gentle acceptance was a language I hadn't learned. Everything burned. The words came out flat, factual. The only way I could say them without breaking. 3 weeks ago, the house, everything inside. I've got what you see. I waited for his expression to change, for pity, for disappointment, for the polite withdrawal of a man who'd bargained for a wife and gotten a charity case instead. He just nodded. That's hard. 2 words. That's hard. Not questions about my carelessness. Not lectures about preparation. Not the calculations I'd been bracing for. Just acknowledgement that some things were hard, and fire consuming your life was one of them. It made my throat tight. "Town's having a Christmas gathering," he said, "at the church. People want to meet you. Would you come?" Would I? As if I had choices. As if showing up empty-handed to meet his community wasn't the last thing I wanted. As if I wouldn't rather hide in his cabin until I'd somehow earned the right to be seen. But I nodded. What else could I do? We walked toward town. Snow fell soft and steady, covering everything in false cleanliness. I noticed his careful gait. The way he matched his stride to mine without making it obvious. The way he didn't fill silence with empty words. Men who talked too much were hiding something. Peter's silence felt different, comfortable. Like he knew silence was sometimes the kindest language. I didn't trust it. "They'll ask questions," I said, testing, seeing if he'd prepare me, warn me, give me a script to follow. Some might. What should I tell them? Truth works well enough. Truth. I nearly laughed. Truth meant standing before strangers and admitting I'd arrived with nothing. Meant nothing. Could offer nothing. Truth meant watching them calculate my worth and find it wanting. Truth was the luxury of people who hadn't lost everything. But I'd learned lying took more energy than I had left. So truth it would be. Truth and whatever consequences followed. The church appeared ahead. Windows glowing warm against the snow. I'd never dreaded Christmas before. Never associated evergreen and candlelight with humiliation. But here I was, about to walk into a room full of people who'd judge me by what I carried. And I carried nothing. He was close enough now I could see his eyes. Kind eyes. That worried me most of all. Inside the church smelled like pine and coffee and something baking. Normal Christmas smells that made my chest ache. Last Christmas, I'd had a home. This Christmas, I had borrowed clothes and a stranger's pity. Faces turned toward us. Women in proper dresses, men in clean shirts, children squirming on benches. The kind of community gathering I'd imagined joining back when I thought I'd join it as an equal. Instead of a beggar. Peter kept his hand light on my elbow, guiding, not controlling. I noticed the difference. Appreciated it even as I resented needing guidance at all. "Everyone," he said, voice carrying without shouting. "This is Gladys. She's come to marry me." Simple. Direct. I braced for the rest of the explanation, the excuses. The sad story that would mark me as the woman who'd lost everything. But he stopped there. Let me be just Gladys. Just his intended, for one breath. I was normal. Then an older woman approached. Gray hair, kind face, widow's black. She carried something folded, blue and white fabric. "Lost everything in a fire," Peter added quietly. "Before the journey." There it was, the truth laid bare. I felt every eye recalculate, reassess, recategorize me. No longer the mail-order bride bringing a trousseau, now the charity case needing help. My face burned hotter than any fire. The widow Mrs. Henderson. Peter murmured, smiled. Not pity. Something else I couldn't name. Every bride needs warmth. She pressed the folded fabric into my arms. A quilt, hand-stitched, star pattern. The kind that took months to make. Welcome to Cedar Ridge. I stood there holding it, words tangled somewhere between, thank you and I can't accept this, and please don't make me feel smaller than I already do. Before I could speak, another woman approached. Younger. Flower on her apron. The blacksmith's wife. Sarah. Can't start a home without dishes. She handed me a wrapped bundle. Nothing fancy, but they're sturdy. Then a farmer, seed packets, for spring planting. A teacher. I've got chickens. Too many. Honestly, I'll bring some by. The baker, preserves, made extra this year. A seamstress. I've got dresses that need wearing. We're about the same size. The carpenter, tools. Every household needs tools. They kept coming, each person offering one thing, one simple, essential thing. And with each gift, the weight in my arms grew heavier. The weight of obligation. The weight of expectations I didn't know how to meet. I wanted to refuse. Wanted to explain I didn't take charity, didn't need help, could manage alone. But my empty hands, now full of strangers' generosity, betrayed every protest. What do they expect? I whispered to Peter. How do I repay this? He looked at me steady. You're part of the circle now. Frontier families help each other. That's how it works. Circle, not debt. Not charity, circle. The word didn't fit my framework, where I came from. Accepting help meant you'd failed. Meant you owed, meant you were less than. Here, apparently, it meant something else. By the time the last gift was given, I stood drowning in strangers' kindness. Quilts and dishes and seeds and chickens and preserves and clothes and tools. Everything a woman needed to start a life. Everything I'd lost. Except these items didn't replace what burned. They were something else entirely. Something I didn't understand yet. Thank you. I managed. Voice rough. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Mrs. Henderson smiled. Just pay it forward someday. Pay it forward. Not back. Forward. To someone else. Someone who'd arrive the way I had, empty-handed and ashamed. The mathematics didn't work. I had nothing they needed. Couldn't repay what I'd received. The equation stayed unbalanced, and unbalanced equations made me uneasy. Peter helped me to the wagon. Helped load the gifts. So many gifts, the wagon groaned. I sat surrounded by other people's generosity, understanding nothing except that I'd entered a world with different rules. Rules I hadn't learned yet. Rules I wasn't sure I could learn. The ride to his cabin was quiet. Snow still falling. The world muffled and soft. I counted gifts instead of snowflakes. Lost count around 20. Started counting obligations instead. They're good people, Peter said. I know. They don't expect anything. I didn't believe him. Everyone expected something. That was how the world worked. Give and take. Debt and payment. Balance. Except, apparently, not here. Here the rules were different. Here people gave to strangers and called it a circle and expected you to pass it forward instead of back. I didn't understand it. Didn't trust it. Didn't know how to live in a world where generosity didn't come with strings attached. But I'd learn. Had to learn. Because I'd arrived with nothing. And nothing was no longer an option. The cabin appeared through the snow. Small, sturdy, dark windows waiting. Peter helped me down. Started unloading gifts. I stood there holding the widow's quilt, understanding nothing except that Everything had changed, and I hadn't changed with it yet. The cabin was smaller than I'd imagined. 1 room, stone fireplace, table, and 2 chairs. Bed in the corner. Simple, frontier practical, nothing wasted. Peter lit the fire while I stood holding the quilt like a shield. The flames caught, spread, filled the room with warmth that couldn't reach the cold inside my chest. "You take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire tonight. Tonight, just tonight. Because tomorrow we'd marry, and then the bed would be ours, and I'd owe him more than I could catalog. I can't accept all this." The words burst out before I could stop them. "The gifts. Your kindness. I have nothing to give back." He looked at me steady. "Nobody's asking you to give back." "Then what are they asking?" "To be part of things. To stay. To help the next person who arrives with nothing." He fed another log to the fire. "That's the deal. Gladys, you receive now. You give later. The circle keeps moving." I set the quilt on the bed. My hands shook. From cold. I told myself. Just cold. Where I come from, accepting charity means you've failed. "This isn't charity." "Then what is it?" "Family." The word hit wrong. Family was blood. Family was obligation. Family was the people who raised you and the people you raised. It wasn't strangers handing you dishes and calling it love, but I didn't argue. Too tired, too overwhelmed. Too aware that I'd entered a world I didn't understand and couldn't escape. We unloaded the wagon in silence. Each item carried inside felt like another weight added to scales I couldn't balance. The widow's quilt. The blacksmith wife's dishes. The farmer's seeds. The teacher's promise of chickens. The baker's preserves. The seamstress's dresses. The carpenter's tools. By the time we finished, the empty cabin had transformed. Shelves no longer bare, table now set. Hooks on the wall holding dresses that smelled like lavender and another woman's life. It looked like a home. I wasn't sure yet if it was mine. Peter made coffee. Strong, bitter. Frontier coffee that bore no resemblance to the delicate tea I'd served in Kansas. I drank it anyway. Let it burn all the way down. "We'll marry tomorrow," he said. "After Christmas service. If you're willing." If I was willing. As if I had choices. As if refusing wouldn't make everything worse. Him stuck with a woman who'd taken gifts under false pretenses. Me stuck with nowhere else to go. "I'm willing," I said. He nodded. Didn't smile. Didn't celebrate. Just accepted my answer the way he'd accepted everything else steady. Calm. Like he'd expected nothing different. It should have comforted me. Instead, it made me uneasy. I didn't trust men who didn't want something. Everyone wanted something. I just didn't know what Peter wanted yet. That night I lay in his bed. My bed. I supposed. For tonight at least, wrapped in the widow's quilt. The fabric still held her scent. Lavender and wood smoke and something else. Grief. Maybe. Or hope. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. I thought about her husband. Dead a year. Peter had mentioned. She'd made this quilt while grieving, stitched it with hands that shook from loss, and then gave it away to a stranger. What kind of people gave from their own grief? What kind of world had I entered where loss became? Generosity instead of bitterness. I didn't understand it, didn't trust it. But I was here now, surrounded by other people's kindness. And there was no going back to who I'd been before the fire. That woman had burned too. This was what remained, outside. Snow kept falling. Inside. The fire crackled. Peter's breathing steadied near the hearth. And I lay there, counting gifts instead of sheep, trying to calculate a debt I didn't know how to repay. The circle keeps moving, he'd said. I'd have to learn what that meant. Learn to move with it instead of against it. Learn to accept that some things didn't balance the way I'd been taught. Learn to build a life from pieces of other people's lives. Tomorrow, I'd marry a stranger. Tomorrow, this cabin would become my home. Tomorrow, I'd start trying to belong in a place where belonging meant giving away what you couldn't spare, too. People you didn't know. Tomorrow. Tonight, I just pulled the widow's quilt closer and tried not to think about how much I owed people whose names I'd barely learn. The circle keeps moving. I'd learned to move with it. Had to. Christmas morning arrived cold and bright. I woke disoriented, wrong bed. Wrong room, wrong life. Then memory returned. The fire, the journey, the gifts. Peter asleep by the hearth. I'd married men before in my imagination. Always pictured white dresses and flowers and family gathered. Never pictured borrowed clothes and a cabin full of strangers' charity and a groom I'd met yesterday. But imagination was another luxury I couldn't afford. Peter woke when I stirred. Didn't speak. Just built up the fire and put coffee on. We moved around each other careful. Like dancers learning steps neither had practiced. We should arrange things, he said finally, before church. Arrange things practical, frontier practical. Make the cabin look like a home before we promise to make a life. We started with the dishes. Sarah, the blacksmith's wife, had wrapped them careful plates. Bowls, cups, simple earthenware. Nothing fancy, but sturdy. Built to last. I unwrapped each piece slow. Noticed the small chip on one plate, the slight irregularity in the glaze. Evidence these dishes had lived a life before me. Been used, been valued, now given away. Sarah's husband made these, Peter said, watching me. He does metalwork, but she made him learn pottery one winter. Said every skill mattered. Every skill mattered. I tucked that away. Added it to the growing list of frontier wisdom I was collecting without meaning to. We set the table. 2 plates, 2 bowls, 2 cups. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. One set for him, one for me. Partnership made visible through dishes. I'd never shared dishes with a man, never planned a table for 2. The intimacy of it caught in my throat. Next came the preserves. Jars lined up on the shelf. The baker Martha, Peter reminded me, had included labels: peach, apple, berry. Each jar a season captured. Some are held in glass for winter's use. Martha lost her husband and 2 sons in one winter. Peter said quiet, fever. But she still makes extra preserves every year. Still gives them away. I held a jar up to the light. Golden peaches suspended in syrup. Made by a woman who'd lost everything and still chose generosity. What kind of strength did that take? The seeds. Peter gestured to the packets from the farmer. Those are for spring, but we can plan where the garden'll go. We, not you, not I. We. Another intimacy I hadn't expected. He showed me the small plot behind the cabin. Snow-covered now, but come spring it would hold carrots and beans and squash. Would feed us through next winter. Would grow from seeds a stranger gave, because that's what frontier families did. The circle keeps moving. I was beginning to see the shape of it. Back inside. We hung the dresses the seamstress had donated. 3 simple day dresses, one slightly nicer for Sunday. All clean. Mended. Smelling of lavender. I touched the fabric of the Sunday dress. Tried to imagine the woman who'd worn it first. What her life had been. Why she'd given it away. People here don't hold on to things they're not using, Peter said, reading my silence. If you've got extra, you share. That's how everyone survives. If you've got extra, you share. Simple philosophy, except I had nothing extra. Had only what I'd been given. The equation still didn't balance. "What do I have to share?" I asked. He looked at me like the question confused him. "Yourself, your time, your skills, whatever you learn." Whatever you learn, not whatever you brought, not whatever you were, whatever you'd become. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe the circle didn't require balance today, just eventual participation, just the promise to pay forward what you'd received. I could do that. Learn to do that. Maybe. We arranged the carpenter's tools on hooks near the door. Hammer, saw, small plane. Each tool worn from use, but still functional, still valuable. "Robert makes furniture," Peter explained, "but he always keeps extra tools around. Says you never know when someone will need building something." You never know when someone will need building something. I was building something. A life. A home. A future from pieces of other people's pasts, using their tools, their dishes, their quilts, their trust. The weight of that trust sat heavy. By mid-morning, the cabin had transformed. No longer empty. No longer waiting. Shelves filled, table set, quilts folded at the foot of the bed, tools hanging ready, seeds waiting for spring. It looked like people lived here. Like a man and a woman were building something together. I stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by strangers' generosity, and felt something shift. Not acceptance exactly, not understanding, but maybe the beginning of possibility. "Thank you," I said to Peter, to the absent givers, to the circle I was learning to see. "For all this," he smiled, small, genuine. "Thank them by staying, by being part of things. That's all they want. Staying, being part, simple requests, terrifying commitments." But I nodded. What else could I do outside? Church bells rang. Time to go. Time to marry this stranger and make the borrowed cabin our actual home and step fully into the circle I'd entered yesterday without understanding. I changed into the Sunday dress, smoothed the borrowed fabric, looked in the small mirror Peter had hung. The woman looking back wasn't who I'd been, wasn't who I'd planned to be, but maybe that was all right. Maybe the fire had burned away someone who couldn't survive here anyway. Maybe this woman wearing strangers' dresses, surrounded by strangers' gifts, about to marry a stranger, maybe she was exactly who I needed to become. The circle keeps moving. I was starting to move with it. The wedding was simple. Church, pastor. Peter and me standing before the same community that had filled my arms with gifts yesterday. No white dress. No flowers, no family. Just promises made in borrowed clothes and meant with every uncertain piece of my heart. Afterward, people brought food to the cabin. More gifts. Bread and ham and a cake Martha the baker had made special. They filled our table, our shelves, our home with more generosity I didn't know how to hold. Then they left, and I was alone with my husband. The word felt foreign. Husband. Peter. This man I'd known for one day and promised forever. He didn't push, didn't expect, just suggested we rest after the long day, sleep separately still. Give me time. Time. Another gift I hadn't asked for, but desperately needed. Days passed, then a week. I settled into rhythms, cooking with Martha's preserves, planting the spring garden with the farmer's seeds, learning the cabin's quirks and corners. Peter worked his land. I worked the home. We orbited each other careful, polite, distant. Then came the dresses. I'd left them hanging, hadn't examined them close. But one morning, alone while Peter checked the animals, I took down the seamstress's bundle and really looked 3-day dresses, one Sunday dress, all my approximate size, all carefully mended where seams had weakened or hems had frayed. I tried on the simplest one, gray cotton, practical, warm, slipped it over my head and felt it settle against my skin like it had been waiting. The mirror showed me transformed, not the ash-covered refugee who'd arrived, not even the uncertain bride who'd married yesterday. Someone else, someone who might belong here. Something cracked inside my chest. I don't know why that moment standing in a borrowed dress in a borrowed life broke me. Maybe because, for the first time since the fire, I could see a future that wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. Maybe because the dress fit. Maybe because strangers had cared enough to estimate my size from one glance and get it right. Maybe because I was so tired of carrying the weight of shame alone. I cried. Not gentle tears. Gulping. Ugly crying that came from somewhere deep. From the place where I'd stored every loss, every fear, every desperate hope that maybe I could survive this. That's when Peter came back. I heard the door. Tried to stop. Couldn't. He found me standing in front of the mirror in the borrowed dress. Face wet. Breath hitching. Gladys. Just my name? Concerned? Not demanding. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. I gestured at the cabin. The gifts. The dress. Myself. Where I come from. Charity means you've failed. Means you're less than. Here it means. I couldn't finish. Didn't have words for what it meant here. He came closer. Didn't touch. Just stood near, present without crowding. Here it means your family. He said quiet. Means people trust. You'll stay. Trust you'll help the next person. Trust you'll be part of what we're building together. But I have nothing to give back. Not back. Forward. He said it gentle, like teaching a child. Like I wasn't stupid for not understanding Sarah the blacksmith's wife. Those dishes she gave you. Someone gave her dishes when she arrived. Martha the baker. Someone gave her preserves to start. Mrs. Henderson. Someone gave her quilts when she was young and just married. I stared at him. Everyone. Everyone. That's how frontier works. You receive when you're empty. You give when you're full. The circle keeps moving. The circle keeps moving. I'd heard it before. But now, standing in this dress made by hands I'd shaken once, wearing fabric someone else had worn first, understanding bloomed. They weren't judging what I'd brought. They were investing in what I'd become. I don't know if I can be what they need, I whispered. They don't need you to be anything except willing to pass it forward someday. He paused. You're part of us now, Gladys. You were part of us the moment you stepped off that stage. The gifts just made it visible. Part of us. Not charity case, not burden, not failure. Part of us. I looked at him. Really looked. Saw the patience in his eyes. The kindness that had worried me from the start. The steadiness of someone who'd learned these lessons years ago and was willing to wait while I learned them, too. Thank you, I managed, for being patient while I figured this out. He smiled, small but genuine. Take your time. Circle will still be here when you're ready. That night, I set 2 plates on the table without thinking. Caught myself halfway through. Peter noticed. Didn't comment. Just sat down like it was the most natural thing. We ate Martha's bread with the baker's preserves, drank coffee Peter had taught me to make strong. Talked about the coming spring, the garden we'd plant, the chickens the teacher would bring, us, our The words came easier each time. After dinner, I washed the dishes Sarah had given, dried them, careful, set them back on the shelf, each piece a link in a chain I was finally beginning to see. I'd arrived empty. But emptiness wasn't failure here. It was opportunity, space to receive, space to learn, space to become someone new, the woman in the borrowed dress, the woman at the table set for two, the woman learning to move with the circle instead of against it. That woman was me now. And maybe that was exactly who I needed to be. The storm hit on a Tuesday. No warning except the smell in the air, sharp, metallic, urgent. Peter noticed first. "Snow's coming," he said at breakfast. "Hard and fast. Need to prepare." I looked outside, sky still clear, but I'd learned to trust his instincts about weather, about the land, about survival. What do we do? Secure everything. Bring in extra wood, check the animals, batten down. He paused. "It'll be all right. We've got supplies. Just need to be ready." I noticed he kept saying we, kept including me in the preparations, the decisions, the work. We worked through morning. Peter checked the barn, reinforced the doors, moved animals to shelter. I brought in wood until my arms ached, filled every pot with water, moved preserves from the outside stores to inside shelves. By noon, the sky had darkened. By afternoon, wind howled. By evening, the world disappeared into white. I'd never seen snow like this. Kansas storms were gentle compared to Colorado fury. Wind screamed, snow drove sideways, the cabin shook. Peter came in covered with white, face red from cold. Chickens are secure. Woods stacked. We're set. We were set, but I wasn't. Fear crawled up my spine. What if something broke? What if we needed something we didn't have? What if I failed at this most basic frontier test? The wind found cracks in the walls. Snow seeped under the door. Temperature dropped despite the fire roaring. "The chickens," I said, sudden. "Are they warm enough?" "Should be." I reinforced the coop this morning. "Should be." Not certain. "Should be." What if he'd missed something? What if they froze? What if we lost them? Because I hadn't thought to check. Hadn't helped enough. Hadn't. Gladys. Peter touched my shoulder. Gentle. We did what we could. Rest now. Storm will pass, but I couldn't rest. Couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tested and wasn't sure I'd pass. Hours crawled by. Wind screaming, snow piling against windows. The world reduced to this cabin, this fire, this man I'd married. Then the temperature dropped further. The fire struggled. Peter added more wood. I wrapped the widow's quilt around my shoulders and thought about Mrs. Henderson stitching it while grieving. Had she faced storms like this alone? Tell me about them. I said suddenly, "The people who gave us things." Peter looked up from the fire. "What do you want to know?" "Their stories. Why they gave. How they survived." He settled back, started talking. Mrs. Henderson lost her husband to fever, but kept his ranch running alone until her son could help. Sarah, the blacksmith's wife, survived 2 harsh winters with nothing but neighbors' help. Martha the baker lost her family, but baked bread for the whole town through her grief. Every gift had a story. Every story had loss, but also survival. Also choice. Also the decision to give from emptiness instead of hoarding against future loss. "They're strong," I said. "They learned to be same as you're learning. Same as I was learning. Past tense becoming present. I caught the shift, appreciated it. The storm raged through the night. I dozed fitful, woke to wind, dozed again. Peter tended the fire, kept us warm, kept us safe. Morning came gray and still. The storm had passed. "I need to check the chickens," Peter said. "I'll come." We bundled up, stepped into a world transformed by snow. Everything buried. Everything silent. Everything waiting. The chicken coop had held. The reinforcements Peter built had worked. But one corner sagged under snow weight. One more hour, and it might have collapsed. I stared at it, at how close we'd come to losing them, at how the carpenter's tools hanging in our cabin had literally saved these birds. "Help me shore it up," Peter said. "Me, not watch while I work, not stay inside where it's warm. Help me." I grabbed the hammer, the nails, started working alongside him. My hands were clumsy with cold and inexperience. I hit my thumb twice, but I kept working. We reinforced the corner, added support beams, made it stronger than before. When we finished, I stood there breathing hard, hands numb, face frozen. But the chickens were safe. The coop was secure. We'd done it. "Good work," Peter said. I looked at him, at the tools in my hands, at the coop we'd saved together, and something clicked into place. Every gift in that cabin had purpose. The widow's quilt kept me warm while working. The carpenter's tools built protection. The baker's preserves fed us when cooking was impossible. Nothing wasted, everything essential. Like the people who gave them, I'd used every gift fighting that storm. And somewhere in the howling wind, I'd stopped being a recipient and become a participant. Not just receiving, actually using, actually contributing, actually being part of the circle instead of standing outside it, watching. We walked back to the cabin. My legs shook from cold and exhaustion. But something else burned inside, pride maybe, or accomplishment, or the beginning of belonging. Inside. Peter made coffee. I hung the tools back on their hooks, touched each one grateful. The hammer that drove nails, the saw that cut beams. The plane Robert had included just in case. Just in case had arrived. And I'd been ready. "Thank you," I said to Peter, to the absent carpenter, to the circle that had prepared me without my knowing. Peter smiled, didn't ask what for, just accepted my gratitude the way he accepted everything steady, calm, present. That night, I slept deep, exhausted but satisfied. I'd been tested, and I'd passed. Not perfectly, not easily, but I'd passed. The circle had held me, and I'd held my part of it. 3 days after the storm, Peter left to check on neighbors, make sure everyone had survived. See who needed help. "I'll be back by evening," he said. "You all right alone?" I nodded. Of course I was all right. The storm had passed. The cabin was secure. What could go wrong? Everything. Apparently, the doubts started small. Whispers. While I washed dishes. Had I really helped during the storm? Or had Peter just humored me? Was I actually becoming frontier capable? Or just playing dress up in borrowed clothes? The whispers grew louder. I looked around the cabin. Every item a gift. Every gift a reminder that I'd arrived with nothing. Still had nothing except what others provided. What happened when they realized I couldn't repay them? When they saw I didn't belong? When the next crisis came and I failed, I tried to distract myself, started bread using Martha's technique, but my hands shook. The dough wouldn't rise right. Even bread betrayed my inadequacy. By afternoon, the walls felt close, accusing. Every item on every shelf a witness to my failure. The widow's quilt, made while grieving. I couldn't even imagine that strength. Sarah's dishes, used in a real home. What did I know about making a real home? The carpenter's tools. I'd fumbled with them during the storm. Hit my thumb, nearly dropped nails in the snow. The teacher's chickens. They needed care. I barely knew how to give. The farmer's seeds. What if I killed them? What if spring came and I couldn't grow anything? What if I starved us both through? Incompetence. The fear spiral tightened. I'd learned nothing. Become nothing. Would always be the Eastern woman playing frontier, fooling everyone until crisis revealed the truth. I should leave, return east, release Peter from this obligation. Better to fail now than later when I'd failed everyone who'd invested in me. I started planning it. What I'd say, how I'd go, where I'd get money for the stage fare. Maybe Mrs. Henderson would buy back her quilt. Maybe Sarah would take the dishes. Maybe I could return everything and disappear before I disappointed anyone else. That's when I saw it. The journal. Peter had brought it from town last week. Mentioned I might want to write. I'd set it on the shelf and forgotten about it. Now I picked it up. Blank pages. Empty. Waiting. Like I'd been empty and waiting. But what if empty wasn't failure? What if it was opportunity? The idea formed slow. What if I documented everything, every gift, every giver, every story Peter had told me? What if I turned passive receiving into active remembering? I sat at the table, opened the journal, stared at the blank page. Then I wrote, Mrs. Henderson. One quilt. Star pattern. Blue and white. Made while grieving her husband. Given to a stranger starting over. The words came easier than I expected. I wrote about Sarah's dishes, Martha's preserves, the farmer's seeds, the teacher's chickens, the seamstress's dresses, Robert's tools. Each entry I added. The fear loosened its grip. This I could do. Maybe I couldn't birth calves or preserve vegetables yet. Maybe I didn't know how to survive drought or treat illness or manage livestock, but I could write. I could remember. I could honor what I'd been given. I wrote until my hand cramped. Wrote every name I could remember, every gift, every story Peter had shared. And beside each gift, I started listing what I'd eventually give. The widow's quilt would become my preserves from the baker's seeds. The carpenter's tools would help me build something for the next newcomer. The circle mapped out in ink. The mathematics finally worked. Not balanced today, but balanced over time. Not debt repaid, but kindness passed forward. By the time Peter returned, I had 3 pages filled. Names, gifts, stories, plans. He found me still writing. Snow on his shoulders, concern in his eyes. You all right? I looked up, realized I'd been crying, not from sadness, from relief, from finding my answer to the question that had haunted me since arrival. I figured it out, I said. Figured what out? How to be part of the circle. I showed him the journal. I'm documenting everyone. When the next person arrives with nothing, I'll know exactly what I received, what to give, not paying back. Paying forward? He read my entries. Slow, careful. I watched his face for judgment, for dismissal, for the "you're trying too hard" look men got when women overcomplicated simple things. Instead, he smiled. Genuine, warm. You understand what took me years to learn, he said. The circle only works if it keeps moving. The circle only works if it keeps moving. And I was moving now. Not backward to who I'd been, not stuck in shame and inadequacy. Forward, toward who I'd become. I was going to leave, I admitted. This afternoon, I thought I couldn't do this. Couldn't be what everyone needed. What changed? I touched the journal. I remembered that empty doesn't mean useless. Sometimes empty means ready. Ready to receive. Ready to learn. Ready to become. He sat across from me, took my hand. The first time he'd initiated touch since the wedding. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. And I was genuinely, not because I had no choice, not because leaving was harder than staying, but because I wanted to be here, wanted to see spring come, wanted to plant the farmer's seeds and give preserves to the next widow, wanted to move with the circle instead of fighting against it. The journal sat between us. 3 pages filled, hundreds more blank, waiting for the stories I'd collect, the gifts I'd give, the life I'd build. The circle keeps moving, and I was moving with it now. Finally. Spring arrived slow, snow melted, ground thawed. The world turned from white to brown to the first hopeful green. I'd filled 12 pages of the journal by then. Not just gifts received, but observations. Things I'd learned. Frontier wisdom collected from watching Peter, from conversations with Martha and Sarah and Mrs. Henderson. How to make bread that actually rose, how to preserve eggs, how to recognize when chickens were sick, how to mend fence, how to read weather, how to survive. The journal had become more than a list. It was my transformation documented, the Eastern woman becoming frontier-capable 1 lesson at a time. Peter noticed, didn't comment directly, but I caught him watching me work with something that looked like pride. Like he'd known all along I'd figure it out. Then came the day that changed everything. We were planting the garden when the stage arrived. Unusual for a stage to come through on a Wednesday. Peter and I both stopped, walked toward town to see a woman step down. Older than me, worn, carrying one small bag and wearing a widow's black. I knew that look, that exhaustion, that barely holding together dignity. Mrs. Henderson approached her first. They spoke quiet. The widow nodded, wiped her eyes. Peter touched my elbow. Lost her husband last month. Traveling to family in California? Wagon broke. Needs repairs. Might be here a week. A week? 1 week in a strange town. Alone. Grieving. Probably with little money. I watched Mrs. Henderson bring her a shawl. Watched Sarah offer her a meal. Watched the circle move. And I knew. This was it. My moment. I went back to the cabin. Fast. Opened the journal. Found my list of what to give. The baker's seeds had become Martha's preserves. I'd made my first batch last week. Peach. Not as good as Martha's, but edible. Proof I was learning. I grabbed a jar, walked back to town, found the widow sitting outside the general store looking lost. "Ma'am," I said. My heart pounded. This was it. My first giving. "I'm Gladys. Welcome to Cedar Ridge." She looked up. Tired eyes. Grieving eyes. Eyes I recognized from my own mirror 6 months ago. Every woman needs something to carry her through the hard times. I pressed the jar into her hands. These are peach preserves, made from seeds the community gave me when I arrived with nothing. Now I'm giving them to you. Her eyes filled. I can't. You can. And someday, when you're settled with your family, you'll give something to someone else who needs it. That's how it works here. The circle keeps moving. The circle keeps moving. I said it with Peter's confidence, with Mrs. Henderson's certainty. with the understanding I'd earned through 6 months of receiving and learning and slowly becoming. The widow took the jar, held it like I'd held Mrs. Henderson's quilt, like it meant more than preserves, like it meant hope. "Thank you," she whispered. I walked back to Peter. He stood watching, that look on his face again. Pride, warmth, something else I was learning to name. Love, maybe, or partnership, or the recognition that we'd built something real together. "Ready?" I asked. He knew what I meant. Not just ready to go home, ready for the next step. Ready to stop being newlyweds, living separate, and start being a married couple, building a life. "Been ready," he said. "Was waiting for you to be ready, too." That night, I moved the rest of my things to our side of the bed. Not his bed. Not my bed. Our bed. Our cabin. Our life. We sat at the table, the one I'd set for two without thinking months ago. Ate bread I'd made. Drank coffee I could finally brew strong enough. Talked about the garden, the chickens, the life we were building. "I want to keep giving," I said. "Every time someone arrives needing help, I want to be the one offering. You will be. I want to teach others what I've learned. About the circle, about paying forward. You already are." He gestured toward town, toward the widow holding my preserves. "That's how it spreads. One person at a time. One person at a time." I'd been that one person. Now I was becoming the one who gave. The transformation was complete. Not all at once. Not in one moment. But slowly. Steadily. Through 6 months of learning to receive. Learning to belong. Learning to give. I pulled out the journal. Showed Peter the new section I'd started. Gifts given. One entry so far, widow traveling through, 1 jar peach, preserves. Made from the farmer's seeds given to me. Circle continues. "There'll be more entries," I said. "I know." We sat in comfortable silence. The kind I'd learned to trust. The kind that meant peace instead of judgment. The kind that came from really knowing someone. "Thank you," I said finally, "for being patient, for teaching me the circle, for waiting while I learned. Thank you for staying, for choosing this, for choosing us." Choosing. That was the key word. I'd arrived with nothing, with no choices, but staying, committing, giving. Those were choices. Active choices I made every day now. I'd chosen to marry him. Chosen to learn frontier ways. Chosen to accept gifts. Chosen to honor them by passing forward. Chosen to build a life here. Chosen to be part of the circle instead of standing outside it. That night, lying beside my husband in our bed, wrapped in the widow's quilt, surrounded by gifts that had become tools for living, I finally understood. I'd arrived empty, but emptiness had been the greatest gift of all. It created space for everything I'd needed to learn, everyone I'd needed to become. The fire had burned away someone who couldn't survive here. Left room for someone who could. Someone who did. The circle keeps moving. And I was moving with it now. Not just following, leading, giving, teaching, becoming the person I'd needed 6 months ago, becoming home. 2 years passed. The journal holds 43 names now. 43 people who invested in me when I arrived with nothing. And beside them, 11 names of people I've given to. Newcomers, travelers, people starting over. Each time I give, I remember standing in that church on Christmas Eve, 1883, drowning in strangers' kindness. Now I'm the stranger offering kindness. The circle works exactly like Peter said. Spring came again. I planted the garden using seeds saved from last year's harvest descendants of the farmer's original gift. The chickens multiplied. I gave 3 hens to a young couple starting out. Watched them carry the birds away. Careful. Grateful. Overwhelmed. I remembered that feeling. Martha and I preserve together now. She teaches. I learn. We laugh. Sarah and I share coffee most Wednesdays. Mrs. Henderson comes by to see how the quilt's holding up. Still keeping me warm. I tell her. Still carrying her husband's memory stitched into every star. The cabin isn't just furnished anymore. It's lived in. Loved in. The dishes are chipped from use. The quilts are worn. The tools hang on hooks worn smooth by hands reaching for them. Everything shows the marks of a life being built. Peter and I work the land together now. Partners in the truest sense. He teaches me ranching. I teach him what I've learned from the women. We both teach newcomers. Last month, a family arrived. Fire had taken their home in Kansas. They stepped off the stage with 3 children and 1 trunk between them. I saw myself in the mother's eyes. That shame, that fear, that desperate hope someone would help. I organized the giving. Mrs. Henderson brought quilts, Sarah brought dishes, Martha brought preserves. I brought seeds and chickens and the knowledge of how the circle worked. But more than that, I brought my journal, showed the mother every name, every gift, every story, showed her my entries of giving forward, explained how it worked, how she'd receive now and give later, how the circle only worked if it kept moving. She cried, same as I'd cried. Relief and gratitude and overwhelming recognition that she'd found something rare, a community that didn't just tolerate newcomers, it invested in them. I gave her a blank journal. I start documenting. I told her, remember who gave what? When you're ready, you'll know what to give forward. She took it like I'd given her gold. Maybe I had. The journal transformed everything for me, turned passive receiving into active participation, turned shame into purpose, turned obligation into joy. Now I teach others the same transformation. This morning I added a new entry. The family from Kansas. Gave seeds, 3 chickens, 1 blank journal, instruction in the circle. Received the knowledge that I've become exactly who I needed when I arrived. Peter reads my entries sometimes, never comments, just smiles that small smile and goes back to work. But I catch him watching me with that look, the one that says, he knew all along. Knew I'd figure it out. Knew I'd become part of this. Knew I'd become home. The widow's quilt is threadbare now. I should probably replace it, but I can't. Every worn patch reminds me of Mrs. Henderson's grief transformed into generosity. Every faded star reminds me that receiving was the first step toward giving. Someday I'll give this quilt to someone who needs it more than me. Someday I'll stitch my own quilts for newcomers. Someday I'll be the widow offering the gift she can't spare to the stranger who desperately needs it. Someday, but for now, I document. I give what I can. I teach the circle. I build this life with Peter. I plant gardens. I preserve harvests. I welcome strangers. I belong. That's the real gift. Not the quilts or dishes or seeds or chickens. Not even the journal, though it helped me see. The real gift was belonging, being part of something larger than myself. Being woven into a community that survives through giving. The Eastern woman who stepped off that stage would never have understood. She thought charity meant failure. Thought accepting help meant weakness. Thought surviving meant doing it alone. She was wrong. Surviving means community. Community means giving. Giving means trust. Trust that the circle keeps moving. And it does. Every time someone arrives with nothing. Every time someone gives what they can't spare. Every time someone chooses to stay, to learn, to become part of the weaving. I learned what hope looked like the day Mrs. Henderson pressed that quilt into my arms. I learned what home meant when I started giving forward. I learned what love was when Peter waited patiently while I figured everything out. But most of all, I learned that arriving with nothing was the perfect way to arrive. It left space for everything I needed to receive, everyone I needed to become. The journal sits on the shelf next to the coffee pot. Some mornings, I read through it, remembering. Some mornings I add new names. Every morning I'm grateful. Grateful I arrived empty. Grateful I learned to receive. Grateful I chose to give. Grateful I found Peter. Grateful I found this community. Grateful I found myself. The circle keeps moving, and I move with it now. Not just following, leading, teaching, home,